Hey guys, I took about a month off because life got really busy, but I'm back at it and I've got a really heavy one for you today. Did the internet ruin our ability to have productive discourse as a society? I keep hearing a similar sentiment across the political spectrum and from everywhere, frankly, and it goes something like this. Do you remember when the news was news? When experts were trusted? When we could at least agree on the basic facts instead of fighting over whose information is misinformation? We need to get back to a shared reality. You see, if it wasn't for all the misinformation flooding the internet and social media, the argument goes, we could have a functional society again. We could defer to people who actually know what they're talking about, the illustrious experts. We could stop talking past each other. We could start solving problems together. That's the pitch. Return to the objective shared reality we supposedly had before everything got poisoned by lies, algorithms, and bad actors. You hear versions of it from everywhere, but some of the most prominent people I hear it from would be Sam Harris, Douglas Murray, Jonathan Haidt, but there's many, many, many more, and they come from all flavors of the political spectrum. But here's the problem with that story. The supposed shared objective truth thereafter, it never actually existed. The fact is that the old reality wasn't some golden age of shared objective truth that magically existed until social media ruined it. That reality existed because a small number of institutions, three major networks, a handful of major newspapers, as well as government aligned sources, controlled almost all of the information that your average person ever saw. When the information environment is that centralized and curated, you get a managed consensus that looks like objective truth. But dissenting facts, uncomfortable stories, and alternative frameworks simply never reached the majority of the population because it was gatekept. I'm not denying there were real advantages to having a broad overlapping consensus. Societies need some shared context to coordinate and to debate productively. What I am rejecting is the myth that the old consensus was objective, neutral, and true, and that the only thing standing between us and functional society is misinformation. The pitch sounds comforting, but have you ever noticed that the people most passionate about returning to that supposed world almost always mean something a little different, a little more specific? What they're really saying is something like, we need to return to a world where my preferred experts and institutions get to define reality, and everyone else is silenced or labeled a threat. First, let's talk about the old centralized system. Here's what that old shared reality actually was. For most of the 20th century, the American information environment was dominated by three major broadcast networks: ABC, CBS, NBC. Them, along with a handful of major newspapers and wire services. And that was it. If you wanted to reach a national audience with video or audio, those were your only real options. The technology required was extraordinarily expensive. Think broadcast towers, satellite uplinks, printing presses, and physical distribution networks. This made it so that only very large, very wealthy corporations and institutions could even participate. Small voices, independent operators, and dissenting perspectives were structurally priced out of the game. This wasn't a conspiracy in the cartoon sense, but it also made for an environment that wasn't neutral by its very nature. Enormous amounts of money and power were involved, and no corporation pours that kind of capital into anything purely out of civic virtue. They do it because it ultimately serves their bottom line, their access, and their relationship with government power. We saw this dynamic play out explicitly when programs like Operation Mockingbird were declassified. This is the CIA's documented effort to influence and place assets inside major American media outlets during the Cold War. That's right. Our government is propagandizing its own people. There's no confirmation that this program has ever ended, by the way. The point I'm making here isn't that everything is propaganda or that every story was fabricated. The point is that the information flow was narrow, heavily filtered, and shaped by the incentives and interests of those who controlled the gates. This resulted in the appearance of a shared objective reality. Most people consumed roughly the same curated version of events every night, with maybe a little spin on it, but roughly the same. And this created a real benefit: coordination, social cohesion, and a workable baseline for public debates. But it was never because the dominant narrative was the pure, unfiltered truth rising to the top. It was, in fact, because the technological and economic structure of media at the time made broad dissent and alternative frameworks extremely difficult to distribute and to gain traction, especially in the face of the centralized narratives. See, that centralized formal system also unintentionally created something else, a deep hunger for voices that felt human rather than managed. When media is polished, institutional, and filtered through layers of incentives, people eventually detect it and crave something more direct. Conversations that feel genuine, where someone actually listens and pushes back without it being a performance for an institutional audience of some sort. The explosion of independent long form platforms in recent years is, in my view, a direct reaction to that hunger. And the rise of this media reveals what the old media was missing. It gave us the comfort of apparent consensus, but it did not give us objective truth. Understand the difference. So, what broke that managed consensus? Well, the internet, social media, and smartphones, they didn't invent disagreement, but they made it near impossible to bury it. Once distribution became cheap and decentralized, anyone could publish, anyone could find primary sources. Stories and data points that the old gatekeepers would have buried or downplayed suddenly reached everyone. What happened next wasn't the sudden creation of misinformation. It was an environment that actually exposed and amplified all information. The downside to this is obvious. We lost the shared reference frame. Different groups now consume entirely different sets of facts and call the other side's information misinformation. Both sides do this. The specific content changes depending, but the behavior is essentially the same. It's also true that not everyone producing research or commentary today is equally rigorous. Democratizing information creation has real costs. But the old system's version of experts were not without serious problems of their own. Institutional bias, career incentives, groupthink, and sometimes outright agenda-driven framing at the expense of fact. Pretending that credentialed experts were somehow free of those pitfalls and above human pitfalls is naive. I personally will take the sloppy independent researcher who can be corrected by evidence over the polished agenda-driven expert whose mistakes or distortions are protected by institutional power any day. And the tremendous rise of long-form content shows I'm not alone in this. The old system suppressed a lot of reality to maintain the appearance of consensus. The new system surfaces a lot of reality, but struggles to maintain any consensus at all. And that tension is where we are now. So what's the real danger here? Well, I'll tell you. It isn't the loss of that shared narrative. That's not the danger. It's those who insist that their truth is the objective truth and that shared narrative was the objective truth and we just need to go back to it within their parameters. Those voices demanding we return to a shared reality are rarely asking for genuine neutrality. What they actually want is for everyone else to accept their side's narrative as the objective truth. You see, once you believe you possess the correct set of facts, anyone who disagrees stops being a fellow citizen with a different perspective and becomes a misinformation vector, a threat to democracy, or a bad actor. The frame shifts from ideas you have to counter to someone who doesn't even deserve to be addressed. That's dangerous. And what they're essentially saying is, if everyone just accepted the correct facts, which happen to be mine, we could all get along. And this turns every disagreement into a moral emergency. It justifies whatever tactics are needed to protect the objective narrative, the truth. This kind of othering, treating disagreement as evidence of moral failure or existential threat, it is not a small thing. It is the very same psychological mechanism that has justified every atrocity in human history. You see, when people become convinced that they alone hold the objective truth and dissenters are dangerous pollutants of objective reality, the door to coercion, censorship, and far worse gets drop-kicked open. And we should take that pattern and its implications very seriously. You see this on all sides of politics and discourse. It's not limited. It is unfortunately very human. See my video on the fundamental challenge of modernity for this dynamic. You see, the specific claims changed, but the underlying arrogance does not. Human beings are not naturally wired for actual objective truth seeking, particularly when our coalitions or identities are on the line. The old centralized media knew this, and it hid the problem by limiting what most people ever encountered. The new environment puts a spotlight on it. So, what is the way forward? Well, we need useful shared context, but we need to drop the myth. The mistake is believing that we can or should return to a system where one narrow set of institutions gets to define objective reality for everyone else. But before I go any further, it's important to draw a distinction here. Some domains are indeed closer to objective. Basic facts about events, physics, math in general. In these areas, evidence can be relatively clear and disagreement can often be resolved through better data or methods. Political and social narratives, however, are interpretive frameworks with varying degrees of usefulness, and they inherently involve values, priorities, historical interpretations, and competing incentives that fundamentally alter how they are perceived by each individual or entity. Pretending that these two categories, math, and historical or political frameworks, that these are able to be seen with the same level of objective truth is a major source of confusion. Just because 2 plus 2 always equals 4 doesn't mean you can have the same level of clarity about global political events. The mature approach here is to treat shared narrative as a pragmatic social tool, not as revealed truth or the product of objective reality rising to the top. We can deliberately cultivate useful common ground where it serves coordination and honest disagreement, while refusing to pretend it is metaphysically certain or beyond challenge. This is not a problem we're going to solve neatly or quickly. There is no simple policy fix or cultural reset that will restore healthy shared context overnight. The old centralized system created the illusion of consensus through gatekeeping. The new decentralized system has given us far more raw information, but made coordination and good faith disagreement much harder. Building something better will be difficult and long-term work. The one non-negotiable foundation I know we need is radical free speech. This is why the First Amendment comes first in the Bill of Rights. The founders understood something fundamental. Nobody, no individual, no group, no institution, and certainly no government is wise or trustworthy enough to be given the power to decide which speech is acceptable and which must be censored. Once you grant that power in the name of protecting the narrative or fighting misinformation, you've already lost the game. Because the people who get to wield that power will always believe their own narrative is the only objective one and the only one worth protecting. Beyond that, we need deeper cultural and epistemic shifts that are much harder to achieve or visualize. Better public understanding of how knowledge actually works, what counts as strong evidence versus interpretation, and where reasonable, informed people can still disagree. We also need cultural norms, and yes, hopefully one day better designed platforms and algorithms that actually reward good faith engagement rather than rewarding outrage, purity tests, and demands for submission. The goal is coordinated action and productive disagreement within acknowledged subjectivity. In closing, the old centralized system gave us a comforting illusion at the cost of suppressed reality. The new decentralized system gives us chaotic reality at the cost of coordination. The way forward isn't going backward to a managed consensus we now pretend was objective. The next step is growing up. Keep the information free at all costs, non-negotiable. Deliberately build useful shared context where we can, and drop the arrogant idea that any side alone possesses the one true set of facts, particularly in domains where the weight of context and interpretation hang heavy. This is the only path that doesn't require lying to ourselves about how we actually got here, and the only one that gives us a realistic chance of returning to a more productive cultural discourse. What are your thoughts on this? Like, share, subscribe. I'll see you guys next week. The break's over. It's the takeover.